Hi everyone and welcome back to the George Collection. I'm Rachel Rightside Blonde. In light of Trump's third indictment this week, I thought we could all use something a little lighter in nature, something to offset some of the gloom. So I'm going to be reading an article from the rant section of the January 1998 George magazine called Bee Gees Be Gone. Here we go. From Boogie Nights to Fleetwood Mac, America has fallen in love with the 1970s. Keep in mind this was written in 1998. But the decade was grim enough the first time. Why do we have to live through it again? Joel Achenbach takes a stand for the 90s. The rise of 70s chic shows that anything, no matter how dreary, can be cleverly repackaged and sold to the American public. Soon we may see advertisements harking back to the Great Depression. For the moment, Madison Avenue is on a 70s tear, using such jingles in their ads as Car Wash and Ring My Bell and Get Down Tonight. Meanwhile, the hot movie is the 70s porn drama Boogie Nights. Apparently, there was even a Carter administration reunion in Atlanta. A great neurological mystery is how and where the brain stores such extremely trivial concepts as Burt Lance. The 70s were bad enough the first time around. At least, we thought, we'd have a lifetime immunity against their return. This was the decade when people thought avocado green was a lovely color for furniture. It was the decade of the Village People and Casey and the Sunshine Band and Werner Erhard's EST and Pet Rocks. There is simply no way to get around the fact that the decade's biggest album came from the Bee Gees. Speaking of which, they're back, too, with a new album. In these affluent times, it is easy to forget how many economic, political, and environmental fears reached their peak in the 70s. The air was dirtier, rivers murkier, everything seemed to be getting rusty. Detroit didn't make cars, it made battleships on wheels. Giant Pontiacs that got 6 miles to the gallon. Somehow the economy invented a way in which stagnant growth could be combined with double-digit inflation, stagflation. Very ugly phenomenon. With a computer the size of a truck, America felt old, a trembling giant with a massive 60s hangover. We distrusted all institutions, all political leaders, and anyone remotely successful. We talked to our therapists every day and read Eric von Daniken's books about ancient astronauts building the pyramids. Streaking caught on for about 4 weeks until people figured out how dreadful is the sight of a naked man in stage light. The 70s, it turns out, were all about meaningless. The 60s had been so full of righteous anger, we had to let go, let some air whoosh through our heads. Farrah Fawcett, yes, back, became an icon because she had great hair. Disaster movies were about pointless fires and plane crashes. Jaws was about a stupid shark that gulped people. Burt Reynolds became a box office boffo in movies about fast cars eluding clueless state troopers. I'm writing this article in an upscale coffee bar, which prompts one last thought. Anyone wanting to relive the 70s should be forced to drink the coffee. The good thing about the coffee then was that it came in a cup in a diner from a waitress named Betty or Norma, who reappeared every 5 minutes to freshen your cup. The bad thing was that it tasted like fried bong water. No thanks, I'll take the 90s. The writer is clearly over-exaggerating about how bad the 70s were and just poking fun at nuances of the decade. But honestly, I think 70s music is better than a lot of the music today. I'd much rather listen to the music from the 70s than the music of today on the radio. But he's not wrong about the 70s fashion coming back in the 90s. I used to parade around the halls of my middle school in my mom's bell-bottoms. What I find most funny about this article, ironic and perhaps a little sad, is that 90s fashion has made its way back into the world. Growing up as a child in the 1990s, the 70s might as well have been the 1870s. It felt so long ago. But it was only 20 years prior. So now it's 2023. And if we subtract 20 years from 2023, that gives us 2003. How is this possible? I have two very deep observations from this most recent discovery. Number one, I'm getting old. And number two, I'm never going to throw out any of my clothes ever again. Just wait a couple years and it'll come back in style. What was your favorite decade for fashion and music? And more importantly, do you still own any of those clothes or albums from that decade? I'd love to know in the comments, and hopefully this episode made you laugh at least a couple times. That does it for this episode of the George Collection. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time.
George, which is a hoot of a magazine. I thought you were a lawyer.
I was.
What happened?
Well, we decided, I mean, actually taking a cue from folks like yourself and you around the 1992 election, that there was an opportunity here to change the definition of a political magazine. Certainly the way Americans were accessing information about politics and politicians was changing. Candidates were appearing on late-night talk shows, on talk radio, on sitcoms, and there was a kind of a leveling process, and while the rest of media clearly had caught up with that, we felt that political magazines per se hadn't.
Your mother was a hell of an editor at Doubleday.
That's what I hear.
Would she have liked George?
I think she would have.